Haiti's Prime Minister Joseph Jutti resigned on Wednesday in the midst of the ongoing social and political crisis. On Wednesday, Danish health authorities announced the exclusion of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine from the national vaccination protocol. Russian Navy vessels are conducting artillery exercises in the Black Sea in response to the deployment of 2 United States warships in the region. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. And we begin in Haiti, where Prime Minister Joseph Jutti resigned on Wednesday in the midst of the ongoing social and political crisis, where thousands of Haitians have been taken to the streets in recent weeks, demanding the president's resignation. President Jovenel Moise accepted Jutti's resignation and announced that the current Foreign Minister, Claude Joseph, will take over as Prime Minister. In his message, Jutti did not inform of the reasons for quitting the post, which he assumed in March 2020. The opposition does not recognise President Moise's legitimacy, stressing that his term in office constitutionally concluded in February. Moise is attempting to draft a new constitution, a proposal widely rejected by massive street protests. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, authorities continue the distribution of humanitarian aid to shelters and areas affected by the eruption of eSUR volcano. In the capital, Kingston, groups of volunteers and collaborators delivered supplies to families and citizens evacuated from the communities in the volcano's path. Representatives of international organisations stated that the distribution of essential products is being done in organised phases to avoid COVID-19 contagion. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines has expressed its gratitude for the support of neighbouring countries such as Cuba and Venezuela. In the meantime, the National Emergency Management Organisation continues to monitor the volcano's activity.
I'm in charge of the warehouse here. The warehouse is an emergency warehouse. It was built on Saturday to receive, take inventory and distribute all the supplies arriving in the country and those that are already in the country, and that the government and private sectors are purchasing. And everything is controlled by NEMO, the National Agency Management Organization of St. Vincent.
In Bolivia, the Minister of Rural Development and Lands, Edwin Characayo, was arrested on Tuesday night after being caught red-handed receiving a $20,000 bribe in exchange for favours in the processing and provision of land. Characayo was recorded and detained at the moment he was receiving the cash, alongside his accomplice, Hyper Garcia, a director at the ministry, on a street in La Paz. As the Minister of Government, Eduardo de Castillo, informed, authorities collected telephone recordings and other evidence. The cash was in advance of a higher payment of some $100,000, officials reported. Characayo will be tried on corruption charges. The President of Venezuela's National Assembly presented evidence this Tuesday of the lies and manipulation of former opposition lawmakers used to justify the theft of the nation's assets seized in the United States. In a press conference, Jorge Rodriguez pointed out that an extreme sector of the opposition, headed by Juan Guaidó and protected by Washington, are trying to set up a scenario to promote the theft of more than $53 million seized by the United States government, by seeking to manipulate figures so that the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control approves the move. Jorge Rodriguez stressed that the seized assets could be used to purchase much-needed vaccines for millions of citizens. Ecuadorians reacted to President-elect Guillermo Lasso's pledge to vaccinate 9 million people against COVID-19 in the first 100 days of his government.
What we ask is the new president, Guillermo Lasso, is that he fulfills those 100 days of coronavirus vaccination, a promise made by Lasso. For example, I am already an old man, but I am not on the list of people to be vaccinated, so I would ask him to comply. The main thing is to comply, sir, not just words, but compliance. COVID-19 cases continue increasing at a national level. Currently, in Ecuador, more than 328,000 cases are officially registered. But we know that this number is far from reality. We have observed that excess deaths have already exceeded 50,000 so far since the pandemic. In recent weeks, the famous RT, the effective reproductive number, which is the basic number of reproduction, has risen in more or less 60 of the 221 municipalities of Ecuador, which shows that the pandemic is worsening.
Vaccination against COVID-19 in 100 days will be one of the greatest solutions he, the newly elected president, can give to the pandemic problem that is killing so many people, taking so many lives, people who have nothing to do with the poverty that plagues them. If the president complies with his proposals and his goals, Ecuadorians will be immensely grateful.
In Colombia, the dead bodies of at least 3 people have been identified in a new massacre in the department of Nariño. The deceased were identified as Gabriel Montaño Quiñones, Dioro Martin Peralta Vázquez and Elda Elicio Prado, who had been missing since April 6 when they travelled to a sector of the municipality of Tumaco to carry out agricultural work. Police authorities reported that their bodies were found with gunshot wounds. Local residents pointed to the existence of armed groups and criminal gangs that are disputing control of the territory. The Institute for the Development and Peace Studies reported that the latest violent incident was the 28th massacre registered in the country so far this year. In the United States, the police officer who fatally shot 20-year-old black man Daunte Wright during a traffic stop in the Minneapolis suburb of Brooklyn Center has resigned, together with the city's police chief. Brooklyn Center Mayor Mike Elliott announced the resignations in a press conference this Tuesday. Kim Potter, a 48-year-old officer and a 26-year veteran of the department, submitted her letter of resignation on Tuesday morning. The mayor noted she had not been asked to resign. Police Chief Tim Gannon also resigned on Tuesday. Meanwhile, City Manager Kurt Bogany was fired after he disagreed with the mayor that the officer responsible for Wright's death should be dismissed. Protesters gathered for a third night in Brooklyn Center this Tuesday as the latest police killing of a black unarmed man further fueled the tensions in a US city already on edge because of the George Floyd murder trial. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. This Wednesday, Danish health authorities announced the exclusion of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine from the national vaccination protocol. The move comes after reports of a possible link between very rare cases of blood clots combined with low levels of blood platelets in some recipients of the jab. The health authority also said the COVID-19 epidemic is currently under control in the country, and as other vaccines are available against the coronavirus, it will continue the vaccination program without the AstraZeneca shots. In March, several European countries, including France, Italy, Sweden and Germany, discontinued or limited the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Meanwhile, European Commission head Ursula von der Leyen announced the bloc is turning more heavily to the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine to make up for the suspension of Johnson & Johnson doses.
We are now entering into negotiations with BioNTech Pfizer for a third contract. This contract will foresee the delivery of 1.8 billion additional doses of vaccine over the period of 2022 and 2023. And the good news is vaccination is picking up speed across Europe. Member states have received over 126 million doses of vaccines as of yesterday. And I'm happy to say that today we have reached the 100 million vaccinations in the European Union. This is a milestone that we can be proud of.
United States health authorities have called to pause the administration of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine after 6 women reported blood clots after receiving the shot. The alleged incidents coincide with similar events in Europe involving the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine. The US Food and Drug Administration issued a joint statement alongside the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, explaining that the events occurred between 1 and 2 weeks after the vaccine was administered. The recipients of the jab that developed the blood clots were women aged between 18 and 48. Nearly 7 million people in the United States have received Johnson & Johnson shots so far, according to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. On Tuesday, French Prime Minister Jean Castex announced the suspension of all flights to and from Brazil in a move to curb the spread of a new COVID-19 variant found in the South American country. The Prime Minister explained that due to the worsening situation and after meetings between the government and health authorities, it was decided to stop all air traffic with Brazil until further notice. According to health experts, the Brazilian strain known as P1 is particularly lethal and one of the main causes for the increase in France's coronavirus death toll. In March, the French health minister reported that around 6% of COVID-19 cases in the country were the more contagious strains that were first found in Brazil and South Africa. In Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin was given the second jab of the Sputnik V vaccine on Wednesday and offered a message of hope.
Treat soon. In particular, thanks to the vaccination, which we actively provide in the country, I would like to inform you that just before entering this hall, I have got the second shot too, and I hope everything will be alright. I am even sure about it, and I wish you the same. I believe you care about yourself and your relatives, that you do the same thing and follow my example.
Uruguay has reported a 24-hour record coronavirus death toll, having gone from one of the least affected countries to registering the highest number of new daily cases per capita in the world. Government data released late Monday showed a record 71 deaths in the previous 24 hours, bringing a total to 1,533 in the country of 3.4 million inhabitants. The figures are still low compared to many other nations in the region, but some 1,300 of the fatalities, or nearly 90%, have been registered since January this year, and a third in April alone. Long held up as an example in the fight against COVID-19, Uruguay has never imposed a curfew or lockdown, despite calls from some health experts, and businesses, bars and restaurants remain open. In Paraguay, where hospitals have been overwhelmed for weeks, the coronavirus pandemic has reached its most deadly moment so far. Health authorities have warned that the record number of COVID-19 related deaths could continue to rise.
What hurts the most is to hear that there are people who still don't believe in this disease. That's what hurts the most. That they tell you that it doesn't exist when you are suffering the opposite here. Families destroyed day by day, desperate to get a bed, to get support for their relatives or no. They do not get it. We are over capacity, despite being the largest hospital in the country. We are being overwhelmed by COVID. So far, we are not seeing citizens collaborating with us regarding the use of the mask, social distancing, and fundamentally by complying with the protocols. We are all going through very complicated situations. We hear from friends, relatives, neighbors, who do not have medication, that there is not good care.
Colombian President Ivan Duque announced on Tuesday that the cities of Bogotá, Medellín, Santa Marta and Barranquilla will be in lockdown over the weekend in an attempt to halt the advance of a third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the case of Bogotá and Medellín, the lockdown will be implemented from Thursday at midnight. As a result of the measures, only people working in essential sectors, such as health or food, will be allowed to go out, and only one person per family will be allowed to go out to buy food, medicine or basic goods. Since the end of March, authorities have imposed and tightened nighttime restrictions in an effort to tackle a new coronavirus outbreak. However, COVID-19 infections and deaths have continued to rise. Since the first case was detected in March 2020, the country has registered almost 2.6 million infections and over 66,000 deaths. The Bolivian government launched an international campaign this Tuesday to demand the waiver of patents for vaccines and drugs against COVID-19. The proposal was presented by Foreign Minister Rogelio Maita at a meeting in La Paz with diplomats accredited in the country and made public at a press conference held after the meeting. The Foreign Minister noted that there are dozens of pharmaceutical companies around the world that are in a position to manufacture vaccines, but they cannot do so because of intellectual property rights. He stressed that faced with such a serious emergency for humanity, any obstacle must be overcome so that vaccines can be manufactured in all parts of the world to ensure equitable access that guarantees global action against the disease is effective. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Russian Navy vessels will conduct artillery exercises in the Black Sea, the government announced on Wednesday. The move comes in response to the deployment of 2 United States warships in the region and as tension is growing along the Ukrainian-Russian border and the Crimean Peninsula. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov demanded Washington stay away from the Crimea and its Black Sea coast. The official described the presence of the United States ships as a provocation which puts Moscow to the test. The White House had earlier announced the deployment of 2 warships under the pretext of supporting Ukraine in the face of what it called the increase of Russian military presence on the border. Russia is open to holding a meeting between Presidents Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden of the United States in the future, but it's now too early to get into details, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova stated. The potential meeting came up in a recent phone conversation between Putin and Biden. Finland expressed its willingness to host the encounter. The Western military alliance NATO is threatening international peace and security by massing troops on the Ukrainian border with Russia, Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez alerted this Wednesday on his Twitter account. China warned the United States to refrain from official contacts with Taiwan after a former US senator and 2 ex-State Department officials arrived on the island on Wednesday. Taiwan is a breakaway Chinese territory established after the founding of Socialist China in 1949 and which Beijing does not recognize as an independent country. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Xiao Lishan urged the US to immediately stop official interactions in any form with Taiwan authorities and prudently handle Taiwan-related issues. The Chinese official also warned the US to avoid harming Chinese relations and peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The move is the latest in a series by the United States and other powers to undermine the One China policy. In northern Myanmar, heavy fighting continues to be reported between the military and the rebels of the Kachin Independence Army. According to local news reports, the fighting intensified in recent days after the Kachin Army, the military wing of the Kachin Independence Organization, which represents ethnic Kachins, seized a military base near the border with China on March 25th. Both sides saw casualties according to unofficial reports. The Myanmar Army has launched several airstrikes to try and recapture the base, suffering several losses. A Kachin Army colonel said in a telephone interview with local reporters that 14 Kachin fighters as well as civilians were killed. Residents in the Somali capital of Mogadishu have reacted to the news that President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, also known as Farmajo, signed a law extending his presidential term by 2 years on Tuesday, despite the Speaker of the Senate slamming the move as unconstitutional.
That the 2-year extension of the parliament is wrong, because constitutionally elections should be held every 4 years. So the extension is illegal and it can lead the country into a political crisis. The extension can have more negative impacts on the country's politics and the security, because you can see that there are more opponents and regional state leaders who are against the extension.
7 years after the abduction of hundreds of schoolgirls in Chibok, Nigeria, parents and relatives of the victims gathered to pray and mark a day of remembrance. Over 100 girls still remain missing after Boko Haram gunmen seized 276 from a secondary school in the remote town of Chibok in Borno State on April 14, 2014. The group claims Islam opposes the education of women, arguing that under its version of Sharia law, women should be raised to be mothers, servants and wives.
I have 2 daughters in that school, one Mariam and the other one Hamsatsu Abubakar, and the purpose of enrolling them into school is nothing more than just for them to gain knowledge. The school belongs to the government, and so to speak, I'm not blaming the terrorists, I rather blame the government.
To let the government and authorities have a convergent efforts to rescue our daughters through the grace of God, that's my own wish and desire.
In Cape Town, South Africa, Indigenous activists are celebrating a landmark victory in their almost 400-year battle to reclaim ancestral land after the invasion by Dutch colonial forces in 1652. TeleSUR collaborator Johan Abrahams has the story.
When the Dutch set up a refreshment station at the Cape in 1652, they gradually displaced the indigenous Khoi, denying them access to this river called the Liesbeek. Battles over the lush pastures continued for centuries. It is also here where the Khoi won a historic battle against the Portuguese in 1510, killing the Viceroy Francisco de Almeida. Developers Liesbeek Leisure Property Trust acquired the land in 2015. At first, a Khoi group called First Nations Collective was opposed to the development on what they considered to be sacred ancestral land. Developers subsequently agreed on including the Khoi Khoi in the development, setting aside land for a media center, an eco-trail, an amphitheater, and an indigenous garden. At an official function, developers signed an agreement committing them to the proposed development.
When I understood the cultural significance of the Greater Cape area, and specifically this area at the River Club, it led me to reach out to the First Nations and say, let us restore your heritage. Let's build an international media center. Let's build an international First Nations cultural center, an environmental center, and work together to educate people about the history of South Africa.
A day that will be remembered and remembered and remembered.
Khoi Khoi leader Zenzile Khoisan calls it a historic occasion.
It's a significant and watershed victory that has been achieved today because it marks the right of return. It marks the space at which we walk away from the space where we were disassociated from the lands of our ancestors, and we have returned.
In South Africa, descendants of the Aboriginal Khoi Khoi and San groups, currently classified as coloured, are still fighting for recognition as First Nations. The developers say the project will bring significant financial stimulus to the city, creating over 6,000 direct jobs and an increase in economic activity. Johan Abrams in Cape Town for TeleSUR.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many of our stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.